while thinking about what to talk to you about, I figured I would go through and tell you a little bit about what we've been doing and what we've been through. The Oregon Zoo Foundation, the Oregon Zoo provides comprehensive and compassionate care for the animals. And at the foundation, we activate that care through the support of our community. And together, we're all working to provide homes for the animals to be able to thrive. A year ago, everything changed. And while we all knew that everything was different, it was really, really fundamentally important for all of us at the zoo to make sure that the animals really didn't know that anything had changed. The zoo ended up being closed for 117 days, but our communications and marketing team tapped into live stream events. The education team created at-home activities for parents who were all of the sudden school teachers. And we found really wonderful ways to be connected to our people with informative and lighthearted videos. Our marketing team was able to reach 40 million people, which brought a lot of national media attention during a really critical fundraising time, and it kind of gave us all something to smile about. It was pretty amazing to me that we were able to create, normally the keepers do a lot of what we call enrichment. It's activities that they do every day with all of the animals to make sure that they're thriving. So a lot of times that means going for walks before people are at the zoo, but because there were no people, the Humboldt penguins, Nacho and Goat, took up hiking in Forest Park. The flamingos and the porcupines spent their mornings wandering around the concert lawn, and the keepers were able to do these live interactions and answer questions, which we hope inspired others to be advocates for animals, maybe future conservationists. And then, so this was one of our videos that I really thought was sweet. And this was the sort of thing that they were able to do quite a bit of because there were no guests, which is not something we necessarily ever want to happen again. But it was pretty special for the animals to be able to go out and experience some areas of the zoo that they might not ordinarily get to see. And one of the other pieces so we have over 2,000 animals at the zoo, which is pretty impressive. Many of them are endangered species. And so that was sort of an example of the activities that we might work on, the keepers care staff would work on to provide this enriching and stimulating environment. And, the other things that they do, it looks like they're training the animals to do tricks, but really oftentimes they're working with the animals to train them to participate in their own medical care. So when if you're ever able to visit our zoo and come in, and you might see the care staff working with the otters, and they'll ask the otter to raise its flipper. And it looks like a trick, but really it's so that they don't have to, oops, we're going to go without me. It's the animal is able to open their mouth and show the care staff their teeth so they can participate in their dental checkups. Or we're the first zoo in the world to train polar bears to voluntarily submit for a blood draw. So the polar bear sticks its paw into a little hatch in its area and allows the keeper to take a blood draw. That happens with a lot of the animals now. So that sort of care happens every day. And this was when we were talking about our fundraising crisis and everything that was going on, these videos that were going out were a really big help for us. And so this is something that happens every spring. And it's a really great part of the season changing. Our bear, Dakota, we call him Taco, takes his big spring bath. So right about the time that we were reaching out to our community and telling them that the zoo was in trouble, that we had no ticket sales, that we didn't know when we were going to be able to reopen, and that we needed help, this video went viral. We had friends calling us and telling us that they saw it in Chile and Japan and the UK. It was all over the place. So that really helped. And what happened was we ended up reaching out to people and hearing from people in 462 cities, 49 states, and 6 countries. Of course, the overwhelming amount of support that came in from the pandemic was from our region. We were able to provide $2 million in emergency relief, $1 million from the foundation's reserves, and $1 million from the community. We had this little boy, Jacob, sent in his allowance. People sent stories about their favorite encounters at the zoo. Donors gave and the members renewed. It was pretty extraordinary. And so that was sort of what we were able to do to bridge the gap. And then the zoo was able to open again in July. And we're still operating at a reduced capacity. But right now we are very excited because we're heading into a pretty cool time. In 2008, the voters approved a $125 million bond measure to help renovate and upgrade about 40% of the zoo's campus. Since 2008, we've built a new state-of-the-art veterinary medical center, a new education center, made significant improvements to our penguinarium so that there was a system. We installed a system that filters the water so they don't have to empty out the penguin pool and refill it every couple of days. And sorry, this is going on without me here today. And so right now we're at the final stage of this bond construction, and we've just reopened the primate habitat, Polar Passage, and we'll soon be expecting to open our rhino habitat. So these 3 projects are pretty big capital improvements that we were able, unfortunately, the zoo was closed for a long stretch of time, but fortunately that allowed the construction to keep going. So we were able to keep on target for opening these new habitats. And we just welcomed back Nora, the polar bear. So we're super excited she's kind of quarantined right now like the rest of us, just to get acclimated to her new space and the care staff. She lived here before the habitat was demolished, and she had been relocated to another zoo, and we just welcomed her back last week, and she's getting used to the new digs. So Polar Passage is pretty exciting for us, and the chimpanzees moved into the new primate habitat in the fall. And one of the things that's really exciting to me about Polar Passage is that we were able to, a lot of the work that happens at the zoo is about taking care of the animals, of course, but it's also about building connections to their wild counterparts. It's really, really hard to study polar bears in the wild. If you want to take a blood or a hair sample, you have to get on a helicopter and go out in a massive white landscape and find a white bear, dart him or her from the helicopter, land, collect your sample before the polar bear wakes up, and then get out of town. So one of the things that Oregon Zoo staff have done for the last several decades is work very closely with the U.S. Geological Survey and other conservation organizations like Polar Bear International to help study polar bears at the zoo in order to understand the needs of polar bears in the wild. So we built a swim flume because we know that sea ice is disappearing in the Arctic, and we want to understand how much calories the polar bears need in order to survive. So we have a swim flume that they can use, and we can study them and again send that information to our partners. So here's a short little video about Polar Passage.
I think polar bears are compelling because of their size, their power, their intelligence, and their ability to adapt to an amazingly harsh climate. We wanted to design a habitat worthy of the polar bear species, not just the specific animals that will live in it. We're calling it Polar Passage. When we broke ground in 2018, it really marked the beginning of an era, but Polar Passage has been decades in the making, and Oregon Zoo Foundation donors have been with us all the way. In the 90s, the pioneering animal welfare research that was conducted with polar bears here and at other zoos taught us a lot about what polar bears need to thrive in human care, but we've learned a lot since then. We know that in the Arctic, when polar bears hunt for seals, they're looking out over long distances for their prey. For the first time, instead of visitors looking down on the polar bear, in Polar Passage there are going to be elevated areas where the bears can actually look out over the visitor. Polar bears evolved in the Arctic Sea. Salt water is incredibly important to their eyes, their skin, their coat, and we've invested in providing saltwater pools for polar bears in Polar Passage. The enormous ice machine is going to spit out small chunks of ice and create a giant snow pile for the bears to play in throughout the day. One of the things I'm really excited about is a cooling cave that's been designed into the habitat. So not only will the bears be able to get into a cooler spot out of the sun, but they'll be interacting closely with guests in that space. Everything we learn here is applied out there. Working with our beloved brother and sister bears, Conrad and Tassel, the zoo really led the way in using zoo-based research to support conservation science. Our many partnerships with scientists and other zoos have helped give us a better understanding of what polar bears need to survive in a rapidly changing world. Polar Passage will really build on that legacy. We've integrated the swim flume that was funded by foundation donors, and there will be other modular opportunities for people to observe conservation science in action. One of our goals was to really bring out front the things that used to happen behind the scenes. You'll be able to walk by and see keepers training an animal to voluntarily participate in its own healthcare, or working with them to understand something about their adaptability. The Polar Passage habitat itself embodies climate action. The habitat incorporates a geothermal loop, and by cooling the polar bear pools, that residual heat will actually be used to heat the elephant.
Okay, so that was the end of that video. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why my technology is failing me a little bit today, but I wanted to share a little bit about that because we're fundraising for both the ongoing sort of sustaining the zoo through this crisis, but we're also helping to finish out this capital project, and we're planning for the future. We have the Oregon Zoo Foundation volunteers were the ones that were able to get together and get this bond measure approved in 2008 through a lot of legwork and a lot of effort. And Oregon Zoo Foundation donors have also added to a lot of these habitats with enriching features like the swim flume that she talked about in the video. So our work kind of continues on regardless of what's going on in the world, because we don't want the animals to experience or encounter any of the struggles that we are. And I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions because I'm sure there might be a few. And I also left my contact information, as well as the zoo has a lot of great ways to stay connected, because I know you guys are a little bit further away, but it's definitely worth, if you're interested and love animals and wildlife, our social media channels are a great way to stay in touch. And whenever we have been doing some Zoom events and things like that, it's a good way to keep in touch if you're interested in following the animals' adventures. Does anybody have any questions for me about our work and what we're doing?
Yeah, one question. This is Ed Meyer. How did you ever get somebody brave enough to take blood out of a live polar bear, not having them chained up?
Well, they work with the animals in the same way that we probably would think of how, here, let me stop sharing my screen. When they're working with the animals, these daily sessions they're never in the same room. So, but it's a lot like when you're working with your puppy and getting them to sit and getting them to give you their paw, and they just do it really patiently and slowly and incrementally. So in the same way that you would work with your pet, you would work with a zoo animal, but there is a barrier. There are pretty specific rules that are dictated by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So any of the kind of interactions you might see on, say, some Netflix show about tigers probably won't happen in an AZA accredited zoo. There's always going to be some sort of safety barrier between the care staff and the animal. But they have these openings that they can stick their paw out. They do it with the lions, the painted dogs, the otters. All the animals work on this kind of training every day. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Question for you.
Yes.
Thank you. Good presentation, Jenny. the or the California Condor Project. Can you give us an update on that? And will they ever fly again here in Oregon?
Yeah, that's our goal. We really hope to see them flying one day in the skies of Oregon. That's something that I write about often. Oregon Zoo Foundation is very involved in our condor conservation program and helping to fund. We just secured a staff position for the next 3 years, funded by the Avangrid Foundation. The folks who are putting windmills everywhere is also helping with our conservation initiative by providing equipment and resources. We have a really extraordinary condor program, if you're not familiar with it, housed out in rural Clackamas County. It's with kind of an unidentified location. People don't even know it's there. And we have captive condors that are breeding. We just had our first time ever that a condor laid 2 eggs at the same time, which was pretty exciting. Normally they only lay 1 egg per season. And what happens is, they monitor them all through their breeding season. And there's at each stage of the process, there's a different step. So once the eggs are hatched, they don't have any contact with their humans. They're in these pens and they're fed through a series of trapdoors and monitored via remote cameras. Their pen is off, the pens where the big condors are out in the outdoor space is secluded, so they don't see cars or people or anything like that. So we are well underway. The wildfires last year did cause some problems for the condor population, but right now there are about 500 birds flying, many of which are flying free. That's a coordinated effort between Oregon Zoo, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, San Diego Zoo. There's a bird of prey center in Idaho as well. So there's a massive effort underway to bring condors back to Oregon.
I have a question.
Yes.
How far in advance do we need to buy tickets to go?
Well, it depends on the time of week. I think the weekdays are obviously probably a little bit easier than weekends. And I haven't really seen, we're picking up, and we're hoping to improve capacity, but we're working right now with the governor very closely about how many people are allowed on grounds at any given time. So I think you can probably get same week tickets for sure. Like you're coming to Portland in a certain time frame.
Yes, I get to see my grandkids for the first time in a year in April 22nd or something like that. And I want to take them to the zoo.
Well, why don't you email and we'll see what we can figure, if I can help in any way. I'll at the very least put you in touch with their membership person who handles all that. So please email me. That's wonderful. I've seen my mom briefly, but I haven't hugged her in over a year and I can't wait for them to get their vaccine.
We were just losing some of our members to a power surge in a part of Coos Bay, but they're all stumbling back in. Either that or they ran to the bar real quick, but I think they're blaming a power surge. So,
wow. It looks like Alan has a question.
Yeah, Alan's got a question.
Yeah, I work with the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition, which is also working with another organization. And that organization is working to get the sea otters back onto the coast here.
The Alaka Foundation.
Yeah, I presume that the Zoo Foundation is also interested in that project. Could you expand?
Sure. If Tim doesn't just cut my mic off immediately, the Alaka Foundation is working to understand. I think there was an unsuccessful attempt to reintroduce otters in the 70s. They sort of just dropped some off the coast and so wanted to see what happened. And so now we're trying to take a little bit more of a scientific approach, and they're, I think, partnering with Oregon State and to really understand how to do this in a way that would be successful. I think that if you read anything about the kelp forests and the importance of those, I think it wouldn't hurt to have a few otters down there, Tim. I'm sorry. I think I'm going to get in trouble.
Well, if I may, just to give the Oregon Dungeness Crab Commission company line. We're actually working with the Alaka Alliance, and our big point from the beginning is unchecked growth from the otters could be bad. The kelp forest is important and could help the crab commission, but we want to make sure that if they do reintroduce that they at least look to understand that they put some sort of a limit, just so that the worst case scenario doesn't happen, and then they try to figure out the limits, because otters are very cute, and to try to do the limits after the fact is going to be near impossible. So that's our main point, and that's all I'll say. I'll leave it back to Jenny on her talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think of otters as a keystone species and really important to the habitat, but I can understand the concerns completely. I know where we work with the Nature Conservancy to raise awareness and help the Alaka Foundation, and we've had them come and talk to us, to our donors and friends. So I think those are the people to maybe look to for the most information, but I can send a video along that we just produced with the Nature Conservancy to help raise awareness of the role of otters in the kelp forest and in those habitats. So I can share that with Tim to pass along.
Yes, and I'll make sure it gets there. No, I'm bound by the 4-way test. I would have to. Mike, go ahead.
Jenny, can you tell us in general, what is the financial resources that the zoo normally receives in terms of, admissions versus contributions?
Sure.
Including, corporate support.
The vast majority of support is coming from the revenue that they're able to generate on grounds at full capacity. So that's with our summer camps and concerts and ticket sales and food and beverage and events. That's dramatically cut in half right now. And so Foundation is trying to step up and double the support that we've generally provided 10% of the funding. So the zoo raises most of their funds through those avenues. There's a small portion of money that comes in through Metro, that's based on the local tax bases and things like that. But we are working to double our contribution and we kind of anticipate that the pressure for us to fundraise is going to continue to grow as the resources continue to shrink as we recover. We are in a better position than some of our partners at, say, the performing arts venues and the convention center, who still hasn't been able to open or generate any business. But yeah, we're at 10% for fundraising. I think that there's on our zoo website, there's also a breakdown that I put in there about why the zoo needs so much support. And there's some financial information that's always available on the website under our about pages. Does that help?
That does. Can you tell us the 10%, what dollar amount is that goal each year? And and how successful have you been during this COVID, trying to double that support?
Sure. So this year we've doubled our support, and we have given them, so I think and this is probably beyond the scope of my pay grade a little bit, because I'm the communications person, not on the fundraising development side of it. But I know that generally, so we do our 10%, we'll fund, say $1 million or $2 million a year in specific things. And then we're also fundraising for these capital campaigns. So we're closing out an $8.5 million campaign to support these new habitats. So they were conceived of in 2008. Any number of factors contributed to the increased cost of construction equipment and materials and things like that. So for example, in Primate Forest, the bond paid for the building, and then we went in and fundraised to provide the climbing structures, the movable fake termite mounds that the keepers stuff with treats for the chimps to keep them foraging for food. We built a waterfall in a stream, and that sort of helps act as a white noise machine and also a place for them to clean their feet off and do act as they would in the forest. So that's what our fundraising is sort of divided between programs that we specifically fund, like camps and different activities, and capital projects. Also, this is we release it all in our annual reports, which I can share for anyone who's interested, and they're available on our website too. Hopefully that answers sort of your question.
Well, Jenny, oh, go ahead, Mike.
Jenny, you mentioned the bond a couple times. Was that
Yes.
a statewide bond to support the zoo?
I'm gonna guess that it was a regional. So it must have been a county measure. I'm not 100% sure. I apologize. I had just moved to Oregon in 2008, and I remember voting for it. But beyond that, I don't know if I recall that particular level of detail on that one. But it was basically hitting a point where some of these improvements had to happen because we had very aging infrastructure from the 1960s, and it was it was an animal welfare issue that we needed to upgrade a lot of these habitats and make those improvements. And now we're going to work towards the next 60% of the campus in the coming years.
So Jenny, I was wondering if you could address a little bit from the fundraising standpoint, what were some of the fundraisers that you lost out on the ability to do? And what are some of the ways that you've found to fundraise?
Yeah, and actually, I think this year's, unfortunately, I hate to, and we've done really well. The community has stepped up and supported us. We have not been able to have any of the in-person events that we would normally do to connect with our donors and take them on tours of the zoo and the habitats, or meet with keepers, or have any kind of personal interaction. So we've really amped up our digital game, which is where I kind of came in early on and helped develop some digital fundraising tools. We did a really successful crowdfunding campaign. That was part of how we did the emergency recovery fund. And then after that, I was able to we had an unexpected visitor, a birth at the zoo in the spring of last year. Our red pandas apparently got a little frisky during the pandemic, and we had an unexpected red panda cub join our zoo family. And so I threw an online baby shower for our unplanned panda, and that we were able to fundraise to baby proof the habitat and feed his and fund their care and food for 6 months. So we've just, rather than say, we haven't really lost anything other than we've just adapted to digital strategies, but you know, and making phone calls and talking to people and letting them know what's going on.
And you have a wine.
Oh, that's how we know each other, and I haven't even mentioned. We did start an Oregon Zoo Foundation wine club, where you can get quarterly subscriptions of extraordinary Oregon Pinots and other varietals delivered to your door, hand-picked by a pretty well-known Oregon wine expert in the area. And so that's another piece of information that I'll pass along to Tim in my little follow-up email. But we have the Wine Foundation Club is just getting started. So it's a new program for us.
I see Tom writing down notes. That was so. Any other questions do we have for Jenny? Mike?
Jenny, you mentioned associations that the zoo is affiliated with, in particular, of course, obviously around how the animals are treated.
Yes.
And of course, you made the reference about, well, you didn't say Tiger King, but from the perspective of the Oregon Zoo, you know, there's a lot of other associated, you know, activities in the state. I mean, you know, things like the aquarium,
Sure.
you know, the state, you know, the Oregon State Aquarium, you know, and the, you know, Hatfield, and but other places, even like down down where we live in Bandon, you know, what's the perspective from your perspective as a zoo person compared to, you know, some of them that are more, gee, I would say touristy, not worry about, you know, preservation, etc.
I think if people are adhering to the best practices of animal care, then there's all sorts of places for wildlife refuges and, at conservation centers that are taking care of rehabilitated animals. The AZA standards are pretty specific, and I hope that any organization that's taking care of animals adheres to those kinds of standards about what's best for animals in captivity. Again, my background is writing and science communication, so I won't presume to know what an actual zookeeper or animal care expert would say. But I know, we work with all kinds of conservation organizations like the Audubon Society and places with wildlife centers that, are doing really important work. I don't think there's anything wrong with attractions that are operated in a humane and correct way, helping people connect with animals and wildlife. That's important. But I do worry about places like the Tiger King or shows. I think I couldn't watch it, but I know that they didn't take the time to put conservation messaging or animal care messaging into that story that would have been really beneficial for the public. I see a lot of stuff on social media about people that have beavers as house pets and things like that maybe aren't, they're going for the engagement and clicking on social media. It's not the best for the animal. I think there's, you have to know what an animal needs to thrive and try and provide it to the best of your ability. Was that a diplomatic enough answer, I hope?
Anybody else?
Jenny, how many visitors do you get to the zoo in person normally?
Normally, I think our record year was 1.7 million. So it's a pretty important resource in this community and place for people. And we have camps and all kinds of ways for people to connect with animals and conservation. And I can't wait till we're able to build a lot of that back, because that is definitely, we basically, in order to survive, we have cut so many programs, and we just have the bare basic essentials of what we need to provide the best care for the animals, but we don't have a lot of that programming right now.
All right. Well, I think you went over the time I promised you we'd have you out by, Jenny. So I really
My pleasure.
And your dog did really well. Your puppy.
Yeah, he just woke up and he is totally eating my hand here. So I'll let him say hi.
Is that hint?
Yeah. Time for a walk.
Time for a walk. Let's go. Well, let's everybody give Jenny a round of applause, and thank you so much again for coming by, and we'd love to have you back anytime.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care, Jenny.